Welcome along to the Final Furlong podcast. From humble beginnings with just 6 horses in a small rented yard to the development of a state-of-the-art facility at Saracen Farm and winning one of the most prestigious handicaps of the entire season, the Cambridgeshire, with the very lovable Astro King. It is a pleasure to welcome the dynamic duo, husband and wife training team, Daniel and Claire Kübler. Welcome to the Final Furlong podcast.
Hi. Thank you for having us.
Great to get to speak to both of you. It's been a fantastic season. The story surrounding Astro King is amazing, and I'm very intrigued to delve into him in further detail in a little bit. But just to learn more about both of you, Claire, you grew up on a stud farm, a top-class one, and European champion sprinter Reverence was born there and reared there. Did you always know that you wanted to be a trainer?
Yeah, I think when I got over the fact I was never going to be a jockey because I'm not that brave, since I was about 12, I wanted to be a racehorse trainer, definitely. So yeah, since then it's kind of been campaigning my life to, become one. And
you've had a number of different academic experiences, though. You were in forensics for PricewaterhouseCoopers, which I would imagine was a fairly intense job. You've also got a background in physiology. So they're different qualifications, but they're also unique in that they would surely be a massive advantage to a racehorse trainer.
Yeah, I went to university. I was very lucky. I was quite good at science, so I did physiology at Cambridge. You cover quite a lot in your first couple of years, and then you really specialize. So I actually did a joint published a paper all about muscles, and it was really interesting how the nervous system works, how the brain works, how all the muscles work. So a really good foundation to understanding how the body works. Then went into accounting, just more to understand lots of different businesses, what works, what doesn't work. And half fell into forensics, but absolutely loved it. Very interesting, very varied, lots of investigations, very analytical. But yeah, ultimately always wanted to be a racehorse trainer. So won a few awards in accounting in the Northwest, and then jumped ship completely, which shocked a few of my colleagues, I think. Came into racing full time.
How many forensic accountants have become group winning trainers on the flat, I wonder?
Not sure on that one.
And could we take your skill set and use it for the BHA to find out where all this media money is going? No, that's a conversation for another day. We'll delve into that in another one. Daniel, you had a very different upbringing. You didn't grow up in the world of racing. So what drew you to the sport?
I loved horses, and I'd ridden, and to be totally honest, it wasn't really ever something I saw myself as doing as a career until I went traveling in Australia when I finished school before I started university, and I ended up working for a guy down there who backed a lot of young horses, and I just loved that, like, really how horses work and getting into their minds and doing all that kind of stuff and really working with the horses. And he'd trained for a little bit. He was out in the bush somewhere, but he'd trained for a little bit in Sydney. And he said to me, like, look, the only way to make a living around horses really is to get involved with racing. And like, I'd always had a sort of an interest in racing without being a super mega fan of the sport. But then that intrigued me. And I got back and I read Martin Pipe's autobiography, and I was fascinated by the whole thing. And I kind of understood suddenly the concept of what being a racehorse trainer really was, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. So then I took that path and I kind of followed it, and I went to the Northern Racing College, as it was then, and did this sort of foundation course and went to go and work in a yard, and worked for Tom George for a while, and then kind of went and did a university degree, and that was equine and agricultural management, and then worked for different trainers basically, and stud farms and bloodstock agents, just to get as much experience as I possibly could. I kind of had that idea that, I could be a trainer. And I was really fascinated with the horse side of things. And sort of when we started training, realized that perhaps I should have paid a bit more attention to the finding clients side of things and getting on with all the people and all of that. Because there's sort of, there's two parts to the whole thing. And I guess that side of things is pretty important. And, we've done a good job with the horses, and I think trying to build the client base is important for us going forwards now.
Yeah, you need the ownership support for sure.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some very wealthy. Well, I know there's very wealthy owners listening who will be even more engaged with the Kübler story after this, and we'll be making some phone calls, hopefully, afterwards. Worked for Kerry Bryan the last time we had her on the show, so hopefully it'll work out for you as well. Mentioning Martin Pipe is really interesting because I should remember Vincent O'Brien, but I would have been very, very young when he was training. So I'm too young to remember Vincent O'Brien training, but I'm old enough to really remember Martin Pipe. And I remember a lot of people being very skeptical about what he was doing. This radical approach, it's never going to work. And he revolutionized the game. And you are bringing in a very scientific approach to your training as well. Was that a huge motivating factor in what you do from the start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I loved sport as a kid, and I probably didn't say that, but I was, you know, kind of not quite good enough at anything to really kind of take it forwards, and this was like a way into that. And I guess when you looked at, you know, kind of working and racing, I was like, wow, this is really different to what's going on in other sports at the time, and I guess there was that motivation around that, and it's, you know, it's quite a traditional conservative sport for lots of reasons, and I think and it falls into the people, you know, in the people space as well, like how management is and the sort of more modern management practices. And I think when I met Claire, we kind of had this kind of click about how, you know, things could be done in a more, I suppose, modern way, without wanting to sound patronizing, but kind of, you know, how staff are managed, how you work as a team together, and then also that sports science side of things, and just bring all of that into racing. And it's not to say that people weren't doing it or aren't doing it, but you know, that's kind of our approach and kind of what makes us tick, I think.
And the husband and wife duo, like, this is a great story, but I think it's often underestimated the role that partners have in setting up training yards. Andrew Balding would tell you how vital his wife is, and we got to see that in the documentary Horsepower. I think people forget that Anne-Marie O'Brien originally had the license in Owning Hill. And, you know, she would be a really integral part in the Ballydoyle cog and everything that goes on. But to have a husband and wife duo, was there ever a conversation that it was Claire's name was going to be on the license over Daniel's, or that Daniel was going to be the one, or was it always going to be the two of you?
Yeah, at the beginning it was a conversation. It was pretty much a flip of a coin, to be honest, as to which name to put on the license. For me, it didn't really matter that much in the early days to have my name on there. So yeah, it kind of went to Dan then, really. But we've always done it from day one together. We've had lots of fresh ideas that we wanted to push forward and make happen. And we're very lucky to have been able to achieve that. But then when the joint licensing came in, yeah, we jumped on it. So definitely.
So
go on, Daniel.
It was something I was always very keen on, because obviously they were already in place in Australia and places like that. And it represents truly what's going on, and the recognition of all the hard work that the silent partner in a lot of these setups, you know, and they're you know, as you say, it was very much 50-50, but, you know, people would recognize myself, but they wouldn't recognize Claire because her name wasn't on the license. Whereas, I mean, there's been a massive difference since we've had the joint license, I think.
Yeah, and it's, of course, as you said, it's a relatively new thing, very popular in Australia, but very new in Britain and Ireland. And yet it seems every week there's a partnership, including trainers teaming up together, which is all working out very, very well. It is, though, a very stressful industry, and it has to be a very stressful career. So does it put a strain on you both, or does it help that both of you are the trainers?
I think it definitely helps. It very much, as you say, it's an intense environment. Your results are published every day for everyone to see. So it helps to have a partner and do it together. Someone's having a bad day, the other one can pick you up. So it can be a little bit of mental support, but it's also in decision making. You know, you can bounce ideas off each other, and, you know, just make sure you're coming up with the best solution every time for the horse and for the owners.
Yeah, I think, you know, you kind of, when you go off on that slightly mad tangent and you've got this very creative, you know, like, let's do something really different. You've got someone going, really? You sure you want to do that? Is that really the best way of doing this? Yeah,
I'm the boring accountant one that pulls Dan back on his creative thoughts.
But it sort of means that every kind of, you know, like, we trust each other a lot with the smaller stuff, but when it comes to really kind of getting into the, you know, the slightly, you know, bigger, more important decisions, there's a, you know, there is a testing of the thought process and a kind of, you know, a rigorous debate, shall we say, around that, those decisions, which I think can only benefit the horses and, you know, benefit the results. So hopefully it all works out.
And in your time traveling the world, you worked for Roger Charlton, Francois Dumont, Guy Waterhouse. I mean, these are all huge names who've had incredible successes. What were the key aspects that you learned from them that you've approached to your own training philosophies?
I think they all had quite different approaches. And I mean, I think fundamental to everything is the horsemanship. I mean, Roger Charlton was incredibly patient with his horses and had the luxury of owners that gave him the time to develop horses the right way, I think. So that was, you know, it was really, and such incredible focus and attention to detail on each horse. And, you know, I spent a lot of time with Roger, and I kind of, you know, I learned a lot from him, spending every day alongside him. And while I was there, I went to Guy Waterhouse down in Australia, a fantastic trainer, very different results, very different model, lots of horses, very charismatic, able to attract lots of owners, and very much a kind of, you know, she trains them pretty hard and she gets a lot of success. And if a horse can withstand that kind of rigorous approach, she's going to get the best from them, which is very, you know, kind of, you know, it's not a suitable way to train every horse necessarily, but you know, she gets incredible results. So it's not, you know, you see these different approaches to training horses. And then Francois Dumont was just, his eye for a horse was phenomenal. And what I'd originally started in the jumps yard, and I went to go and work for him one summer. And that kind of got me really hooked into the flat, because he's a very, very good breeder and bred so many good horses as well. And he was, you know, standing the stallion, and he had the offspring. And I was lucky enough there where, I would work on the stud farm in the afternoons and work in the training yard in the mornings. And, you know, I could be mucking around with a foal, and then I'd be riding the 4-year-old the next morning. And you really start to get that kind of sense of pedigree and family and how things develop. And that really hooked me into flat racing and took me down that path, like that kind of continuation of the generations and the pedigrees. And I think, like, you know, then going to Rogers and working there at Beckhampton with those incredible Juddmonte families and some of the Royal Stud families and the Rothschild families, where, you know, like, they train for 4, 5, 6 generations sometimes, those horses. Incredible experience.
It seems to me that in order to be a successful trainer, you don't just have to have the scientific approach that you're using, but also, crucially, the horseman approach. I think you also need to be a politician, because you've got to keep those owners happy, and then you've got to attract more owners in. And if you look at someone like Willie Mullins, there's a lot of criticism about the dominance that he has, but I think it's to be applauded what he's doing, because you're trying to keep, with the greatest of respect, massive egos happy. If someone has spent a lot of money on a racehorse, irrespective of whether it was a £500,000 purchase or a 50 grand purchase, if they want that horse to run in the Supreme Novice Hurdle, he's got to try and persuade them. Back in the day, oh no, you want to go for the Ballymore because there's another horse here for that. And now it just seems like somehow he's able to keep all of those big personalities happy and then train those horses to run against one another when it comes to the big occasion. That's him. I could say the very same thing for Gordon Elliott, Paul Nicholls, Nicky Henderson. We can go on and on and on. Just how crucial an aspect, though, Claire, is that in racing, that you have to be able to attract these owners, but then keep them happy?
Yeah, I think it's working together with your owners. Everyone's got different expectations. It's educating them sometimes on how we do things and why we do them. I think that can often help explain stuff that has sometimes seemed a bit grey in racing. By having more scientific or data-driven angles, it just helps make things a bit more black and white. So, for example, if a horse needs more time, a knee x-ray of the growth plate really demonstrates the horse needs more time. So it's not a subjective thing. It makes it much clearer. But, you know, we are here to make it fun. You know, owners have to have a great time, and it's working together to get those results. And I love sharing that journey with the owners. We've had fantastic occasions. Like, don't tell Claire, you know, we had an order to buy a grey filly, and yeah, we managed to achieve that. And she's just given them so much fun. And they've been fantastic owners as well. Like, they've always worked with us when she needed time. You explain why, and they got it. And yeah, she's rewarded all of us and given us special moments. And second at Royal Ascot this year, I mean, it was just jaw-dropping for all of us. And that just, you cannot get that sensational feeling from anywhere else, really. Certainly not from accounting.
The name worked out pretty well too, to be fair.
Yeah. The owner's wife was called Claire, so hence don't tell Claire.
Yeah, worked out very, very nicely. Astro King, he had promised a lot for Sir Michael Stoute. I think we talked about him endlessly on this show. Was this going to be the day he was going to perform? At his peak for him, he was rated 102, but it was clear there was something there. And yet nobody wanted him at the sales except for Daniel and Claire Kübler. I'm sure there has to have been an underbidder. I think you were saying to Nick Luck that it was a Spanish owner who wanted a horse for a big race out there. Thankfully, he didn't get him. He's now, when you ran him first, he had a mark of 99. He's now 116, having won one of the most prestigious handicaps in all of Europe off top weight. It couldn't have worked out any better.
No, I mean, I think you always buy horses with hopes and dreams, and you're kind of, this is going to be a Coventry winner, and you line all of these horses up when you're trying to sell them and you try and sell the dream a bit, but it doesn't always come true. And this is sort of kind of like the hope was to be able to buy a horse that was good enough to compete on those kind of at those bigger races, but to go sort of, and the journey has taken us on the way it's panned out. It's been fantastic because he went so close in the John Smith's Cup, and it was kind of agonising. But then it kind of meant that the 2 wins afterwards were so much more kind of rewarding in a way, because having got so close and tasted it, to then go and actually show that that wasn't just a fluke, because he was 50-1 that day, and I think dismissed, and he'd definitely been written off by everyone by that stage. And the work he'd been doing is good, and it continues to be good. So no, it's been a fantastic journey. And
it's just been rewarding for everyone involved, really. Like the whole team at home, everyone's played a role in getting him to be the horse that he's capable of being. And he did incredibly well for Sir Michael Stoute. There aren't many horses that can come 2nd and 4th in the Hunt Cup. So the ability and the talent and the engine's there. It's just kind of the final jigsaw pieces. And even, those big races, you need luck. And we were lucky to get that luck.
Eventually.
I'm saying eventually, the reason I was shaking my head was we never talk about selections on air, either on TalkSport 2 or on the Final Furlong. It needs to be natural. So Louis Stewart and I had not consulted each other beforehand. And I would always let him or whoever's on the show with me go first. And he says, so I've come up with the conclusion that Astro King's going to win this, and he's way too big. And this is amazing. I've picked him too. And we had both independently gone for him at 66s. And I heard you saying afterwards that photo finish seemed to go on forever. It really did seem to go on forever. It was an agonizing defeat. But to build from there, you'll often see a horse perform massively in a valuable handicap and then just underperform afterwards. Not at all. He goes to York during the Ebor meeting and wins. And then, of course, the massive success the other day. He just seems to be thriving for you now.
Yeah, he certainly struts around Lambourne like he owns the place, which it's nice to have a horse do that. And I think the whole yard that we built, because we built this all from scratch. It was an old farmyard, knocked it down and built it to the spec that we really wanted. And that meant having stables that are big, light, airy, got back windows so they can see out. They've got half and half partitions. So he's got his brotherly love with his mate next door, Helm Rock. They sometimes hate each other, but most of the time love each other. I think for a horse to have those, the variety for them and just being happy. And then obviously getting very spoiled with a lot of carrots and polo mints. I'd like to say every horse got the same amount of polo mints, but he probably does get a little bit more than the rest of the horses.
Whether it's cats or dogs or horses, we all have favorites. We're not supposed to, but we all do. And there's a certain cat at my house that gets a little bit extra than the others, and gets away with everything as well, where the others get rollicked for it. I've tried to learn as much about this sport as I possibly can, and I'd heard it mentioned before, but I had no idea. I knew about the speed gene. I didn't know about genetic testing. Really, until I read an article with both of you earlier in the year, and then you were talking about it again on Look on Sunday. How does that work, and what was it about the genetic testing of Astro King that made him so attractive to you at the sales last year?
So we don't do that process at the sales. We do it after we've bought the horse to try and work out the best way to campaign the horse, and it's just one of the, you know, like the most important thing is still the guys sitting on the back of the horse and the team working with the horse and working with them. But then we sort of analyze the horse and break it down. And one of the things we'll do is we'll do the speed gene test and look, okay, how's this been? So like with Astro King, it indicated that potentially he could stay a bit further than he'd been racing over. And, you know, so Michael had tried it in fairness. And in fairness, there were other reasons on the day that the horse hadn't performed rather than, you know, the trip being the issue, which is one of the appeals when we were looking through, and we spent a lot of time analysing the form before we buy these horses. One of the appeals was like, actually, this avenue hasn't been, it's been explored, but there were other circumstances that meant it hadn't been properly explored with everything going right for the horse kind of thing. So that slight step up in trip was one of the kind of big appeals when we bought him. I think he was relatively cheap because he'd run quite badly on his 2 previous starts, which were both on softer going, which, you know, people get concerned when a horse hasn't run well on its most recent couple of starts, particularly when Ryan Moore's kind of looking down, not very interested. So that kind of probably knocked a fair bit off the price. But if you were prepared to take the chance that that was because of ground and actually put all the form together, it works real well. So it's analysing all those components.
Yeah, and it's doing the full MOT at the sale as well. You know, at the end of the day, we picked up an awful lot of experience over the years working with vets, learning what to look for issues. And yeah, so he ran a week before the sale and we could thoroughly check him as best as we could. And he was fine. So it gives you confidence that the horse should be okay.
The most valuable commodity in racing is potential. And watching the Tattersall sales and seeing horses going for 7 figures left, right, and centre in Book 1, is that a Derby winner? Is that a King George winner? Or is that going to be a handicap chaser in years to come? It seems as though there is obviously a science to this, but at the same time, there's a bit of randomness to it, particularly in the very early days of a horse. He was always held in very high regard, though, which is why he was being sent off the price as he was. So was that something you were looking at as well, that you felt that if you were able to get to whatever it had, that it ailed him, or any issues that he had, that you would be able to unlock that potential?
Yeah, I think if a horse has shown that they've got the speed and the ability like that, then yeah, you know you've got that engine. Physiologically, you've got to know you've got a horse with good lungs, good red blood cell capacity, you know, great way to turn that into energy in the muscles. And yeah, as you say, you've got all the key components there. It's then how do we get it back out of him? And I think, as Dan said, you know, there was just quite a few unlucky moments in his career where things didn't go right. He pulled a shoe off in a race. He had soft ground after soft ground. And yeah, when you start removing those negatives from his form, you suddenly got a star shining through. And yeah, it's just getting things to fall right.
I think it's something when people are, you know, you'll have lots of people listening now who are, you know, punting and whatever, is I think the market very often places too much emphasis on the most recent run and doesn't look for reasons why that run might have been poor or was abnormal. And equally, if a horse has run very well, did it have every single circumstance it needs to perform very well in that most recent run? And, you know, those last time out winners probably get overbet too often, and the sort of horse with the poor performance probably gets underbet at times. And, you know, you have to understand those in context. But, you know, it's exactly this. When you're buying a horse, you're basically making a bet. You know, a horse with form is can I get the best out of this horse? Or is there something in this horse's form that's suggesting that changing something to do this and this will equal in a better result? It's just kind of, I suppose it's like having it's having a bet, but it's kind of on steroids, for want of a better word. That's probably a really bad analogy to use in this context, but you know, that's what you're doing. You're looking for that potential and you're trying to upgrade it. I mean, the Book 1 yearlings, the people playing that game, they're looking for, you know, stallion prospects. You know, ultimately they're buying the colts, and the fillies, they're looking for those fillies that are going to be, you know, really important broodmares down the line, and those are the bets they're taking. But you know, that's the super high stakes, you know, VIP lounge. You know, we'd like to get there one day, but we're not quite there yet. You know, like, you know, you need some serious investment to go and play at that table. But hopefully, by proving you can do it at sort of lower levels, you know, you can build a bit of a bankroll for one of a, you know, and go and play at the higher stakes table.
Nice poker lingo there, by the way. I used to commentate on poker for a long time. Very, very well played. When you were at the sales this year, did you notice people shadowing you who are Daniel and Claire interested in, and whoever they're interested in, we're going to go for?
No.
No,
are you sure you didn't have to do a bit of bluffing yourself, pretend you're really interested in this horse, and actually it's the one over there you really wanted?
Yeah, I think by the time you've kind of like, we'd want to be fairly confident that we're really happy with the horse. So by the time you've looked at it a couple of times and you've done all the work, it's fairly obvious that you've got some level of interest in the horse. So yeah, I don't think we're quite at that level yet. You need to probably need to pull the trick a few more times, I think.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. I mean, this wasn't a fluke. You've done this before, but how difficult is the sales and the racehorse sales? Because we know how incredibly competitive it's gotten internationally. The Australians come over and buy a lot of the top middle distance horses, or at least the high class middle distance handicappers. Those horses that used to go to the jumps game. It's very, very rare that we get those now. Even the Royal Ascot winner, Burdett Road, who won the other day, it's kind of strange that he's going down the jumping game. We're delighted to see it, but it's not something we see as much these days. So with the international competition and the major owners that are involved in British racing and the lack of prize money, just how difficult is it at the sales, Claire?
It is challenging. It's a lot of work, a lot of ground to cover, a lot of horses to see, a lot of focus all the time, because you don't want to make a wrong decision. As Dan said, it's like having a bet, but on a much bigger scale. There's a lot more money involved, and you feel very responsible. Whatever you're doing, you're buying this horse for other people to own. So you want to make sure you make the best decision possible. And then there's the vet work as well, so finding time. And we work with Rossdales at the sales, and they're exceptional at fitting in around us. We're a few last minute vettings, and they're incredible. They work so hard as well. And so does everyone consigning and showing the horses. They're on their feet. I think they do like 50,000 steps a day, some of the guys showing. It's a lot of work for everyone. But very rewarding if you get it right. And it's finding your niches. As you say, there are markets out there for certain types of horses, and we're never going to afford those horses. So it's looking for other niches that do exist. So yeah, it's just being super analytical, and we've been very lucky. Alan Kerr, one of our owners, he called us up when we got a joint license. We'd had a double at Sandown, our first winners, and he said, I really like you guys, go get me an older horse. And we did that year. We got Percy's Lad. He broke the track record at Chester last year and done phenomenally well for us. And off the back of that, Richard Farquhar said to us, come on, you're good at this, go again. And we were like, no, we bought enough yearlings, we can't go and buy an older horse as well. And he kind of kicked us to go to horse and training sale. I'm so glad he did, because that's obviously when we bought Astro King. So yeah, it's having faith in ourselves as much as anything. But yeah, it's hard work at sales, but most things in life are hard work if you want to do well. So.
And the horses and training, there is just a huge volume of horses, and you haven't got that much time because they're running right up to the sales. So you've got to keep an eye on the form side of things, and you've got 3 weeks from when the catalogue's published and that's in the middle of the yearling sales, by the way. So you're kind of concentrating on that. So you've got a week in between really to do the analysis on the form, and then you've got a week of just looking at horses every day, and you really have to focus, and it's a pretty intense process.
Yeah, and we've actually had some assistance this year, which has been quite interesting, new angles to look at. Byron Rogers has been working with us, looking at their kind of Stride AI system that they use. So that was quite interesting angle to learn a bit more about. And then Tom Morton as well, he's been looking at more the stride frequency and have horses been running over the right trip. So he's had a little short list for us to look at as well. We've actually bought a horse using that angle, which will be interesting to see how he works out. So you're always learning, aren't you? And really open to new ideas, new avenues to find those niches that might and should exist.
Is that horse by any chance from the Charlie Johnston yard, the in these shoes?
No, that's actually a horse called Salamanca Lad. Who is from?
I had two horses I could go for, and I went for the wrong one.
Who's a 6 furlong? He's won over 6 furlongs, and he's done nothing wrong. He's won. He's run 5 times, and he's won a race, and I guess for whatever reason, Richard and his owner decided that he was one to move on. But we just thought that he'd run exclusively over 6 furlongs, and Tom had done a lot of work on sort of giving us lists. Him and his mates, they're very clever at collating all the data and kind of produced an algorithm that threw out a bunch of horses that they thought could step up in trip. And we then went through those and analysed the form, and then looked at the horses and were like, okay, this is a horse that really looks like he can, step up on trip. His pedigree, he's by profitable, is obviously a sprinter, but the dam was an unraced See the Stars mare who's had a horse by Memas, who stayed 1.25 miles, won over a mile, and kind of progressed from 2 to 3. So it's kind of a similar thing. The mare's been sent to a sprint stallion and produced this horse that stayed a bit. So every reason for this horse, and then obviously the stride cadence suggests. And if you watch his races, I think in 3 of the 5 runs, time form suddenly kind of mentioned something, stamina coming into play, staying on. So there's a lot of kind of hope that this horse is a horse that could improve over further, or at least win races over further. So we'll see. He costs 12 grand, which isn't a huge amount in the thing, but everyone will have a lot of fun with him. And if he improves a bit for going further, we'll win plenty of races. And if he ends up around 80, he's going to be worth a lot more next year when he goes back to the horses and training sale. So that's kind of the idea there, and it'll be a bit of fun and interesting to see how it works out.
In the real world, 12 grand is a lot of money, but in the context of the racing world, that's nothing. That's a pittance.
Yeah. But he's rated 67, so he's got to improve a bit. So
well, I'm excited to see what you can do with them. What about in these shoes, the slightly more expensive, a 40,000 purchase? What was the driving factor or the motivation behind buying her?
So I think she's really she's shown quite a lot of ability, and she'd run really well just before the sale in quite a good race at Newmarket. It looks like most of her form is on quicker ground, her better form. She's run on both. She's a big strapping filly. She's got a good pedigree. So the nice thing about her is she should retain a good chunk of that initial investment as a broodmare. She's a winner. She's done well. She's got good race form. She's got a nice pedigree. And really with her, I think there's a really nice progress. So this is like understanding the race program. She'd run a lot as a 3-year-old against colts and geldings. And there's a real nice program for those miling fillies. Well, hopefully the BHA hasn't smashed it with their new revolutionary going to change racing, because then this might not work quite out so well. But, which is why they need to publish these programs early. But anyway, let's not get too into racing politics. We're buying horses without quite knowing what the race program's going to look like next year, which is challenging,
Well, they don't know how they're going to fund it. And I think it would have been a pretty good idea, if you're going to come up with a whole new premierization idea, to then not give an interview to Matt Chapman saying, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised about how we're going to fund this. Maybe just tell us how it's going to be funded. The whole thing is... Anyway,
let's talk about horses. Much more interesting. So, basically, there's that nice program. She should be pretty competitive, stuck to her own sex company. And, if she can progress a little bit, and she looks physically like she moved really well out at the sale, and she looks physically like a horse that, could improve as a 4-year-old. The Johnsons are obviously exceptional operators. They get plenty out of their horses, but she looked like one where there could be more to come, just given her physical, presence. And there's a nice race program for her, kept a filly-only company, and we went very close in the Kensington Palace this year with Don't Tell Claire, who's retired off to stud now. So hopefully, she might be some horse that can step into that role and have a crack at that race if she progresses a little bit next year.
And her half-sister won a listed race in France. She was by Kodiak. This one's by Star Spangled Banner. So you would like to think that there is going to be more improvement to come there, Claire.
Yeah, it's a nice pedigree, which was one of the attractions, because it meant you could kind of spend the money somewhat safely. It's going to hold on, and she's pretty closely related, isn't it? It's a sort of Dane Hill onto the mare, that Dane Hill line through. So yeah.
Well, the fact that she has the second career pretty much locked up, that's a nice little bonus. But I think she will add to that in the meantime. Claire, going back to your background a little bit, you worked with John Warren at the sales. So how much did you learn from there to be able to apply to acquiring horses to train?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I spent 3 sale seasons with John and Harry, going around when they were buying for the Queen and obviously for High Claire Thoroughbred Racing. Guys, you learn a lot when you're just watching what kind of horse they look for and how the horse moves. So whenever I see a yearling come out, I'll just watch it walk straight away, because to me it's all about, a lot of it is about how they move, that efficiency of motion. And John and Harry, you know, they love a beautiful mover. I think the pedigrees or the kind of biomechanics of the breed is slightly becoming more speed, more 2-year-old orientated. So I've had to adapt my eye anyway, since working for John, to be willing to accept the more invincible spirit or Kodiak way of walking. It won't be the big glamorous 10 furlong walk. It will be a bit more shorter in action, but a bit quicker turnover, and, you know, a bit shorter in stature. So yeah, it depends what horse your owner wants, what you're looking to try and buy. But that wealth and the experience to learn of people like that, it is really helpful. And then you adapt as you train as well. You realize what you can train and what doesn't suit your training.
How do you both feel about the obsession with speed in the breeding industry now? We've had it seems as though all the middle distance horses who have been retired recently in the last couple of weeks, they're off to Japan. And Japan are big into stamina and class. But the emphasis in Europe and in the Northern Hemisphere, what's been in vogue for the last few years has been speed and class, and stamina is a no-no. It seems as though there's a lot of fans out there who can see this is not a good thing in the long term for the sport. And I think that's why a horse like Auguste Rodin is going to be very important going forward. But he's going to cost an absolute fortune. And not everybody's going to be able to send their mare to him. So how do you feel about the current obsession with, really it's in the last 10, 15 years, it's all been about speed in Europe, whereas in Japan, who are getting all the plaudits, they seem to really want class and stamina.
Yeah, I think the reality is that prize money means that, you know, people want a quickish return, because there's no value to an owner in buying that horse that's going to take a bit longer and need a bit more time, which is a bit of a shame, because actually those are, in the long run, those mile and a quarter, mile and a half horses are really nice horses to own, and there's a lot of good races for them at all those kind of festival meetings, which, you know, that's where the fun is, really, you know, trying to compete in these, you know, these big handicaps. So I think the obsession is not so much with precocity rather than speed, but the result of precocity is speed, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very much driven by the prize money, I would say, from what I've seen. And you hear, you know, the owners go, you know, kind of want to see some action. And I think as an industry, we've all got a responsibility to ensure racehorses have a nice long career. And part of that is supporting the mile plus division of horses. And, you know, we're a bit unlucky that our milers here in England get sold quite readily abroad because they're in demand, but then it makes the mile division then weaker as they get older. And yeah, supporting that so that the betting public, you know, a lot of my old colleagues from like PwC, they love jump racing more because horses came back year after year. So they could really get to know the horse and follow them and become a...
Yeah, I suppose, you know, they almost kind of get like a cult status, even if they've only got a kind of, you know, they don't have to be a Group 1, Grade 1 horse, but if you're one of these horses that can regularly turn up in certain races, you know, 2 or 3 years in a row, you kind of, there's a bit of momentum around the horse, and it's interesting, and people enjoy following that. And I think the sport's got to be very careful that it allows that to continue to happen, and trainers, you know, like, there needs to be enough incentive to ensure that horses have long careers. I think that's something I probably feel a little bit strongly about, is that the over incentivization of early speed and the pressure to push horses early isn't always the best long-term outcome for horses.
Yeah. But there are great initiatives. I know the Racing League might have had its starting problems, but it does give very good prize money. There's no denying that, as does some of the Sunday Series races, as does some of the finals that the Jockey Club do. So Helm Rock, as a 5-year-old this year, he's just won a £70,000 race and a £50,000 race, you know, which is fantastic. And Dilip, he joined us last year as a 6-year-old, and he's won 90,000 in a year and a bit, which is amazing. But it's only been achieved because of these initiatives. And yeah, I think they're great. And it's how do we expand on that and not just put all the prize money into early 2-year-old speed?
And encourage this kind of churn of horses, which I think is very dangerous. You know, there's this kind of pressure to find out how good the horse is, and if it's not, you know, top class, get rid of it as quickly as possible. And we just, you know, almost from a welfare perspective, prize money needs to encourage people to, you know, ensure horses have a longevity. And we want to train horses that can run 30, 40 odd times if, you know, if that's the right thing for them, and they've got the ability to run and run consistently. And often that means you have to be a little bit more patient early on. But, you know, we want horses that can win at 2 and progress again at 3 and 4. You know, that's kind of the ideal scenario.
The Derby is the race. It's the famous quote about that it's the most important piece of wood in racing, and yet the last 6 winners, for various different reasons, to be fair, only one is at stud. Coolmore have got a high-class problem on their hands. Do you keep Auguste Rodin in training and go for the Breeders' Cup Classic? Michael Tabor certainly seemed to be intimating that that's what he wanted to do in an interview with Matt Chapman at the Breeders' Cup, and MV Magner was definitely talking the talk to Nick Luck in the winners' interview afterwards, but they're going to have a lot of breeders wanting to breed to Auguste Rodin, so it's a high-class problem for them. But if he doesn't go, if he stays in training for another season, then there's only one Derby winner currently at stud from the last 6 years, and that's not good.
You know, I mean, equally, you'd like to see the Derby winner stay in training as a 4-year-old. You know, like, I think that's to be encouraged, because actually it kind of creates the you know, the following for people to latch onto these horses and follow them, and kind of have a reason to follow them, that they stay in training and measure the generations against each other. Because surely that's the really fascinating thing about, you know, these 3-year-old classic winners have only beaten their own generation. Can they do it consistently against all comers? And you know, I think, is it Cheldine, for example, like, he's retired to stud, and, you know, I understand completely why, but, you know, the question is going to hang over him is he never beat older horses, did he? I don't think.
No, he didn't. No. And even the form of his, like, there's the old saying used to be, there's 3 races to make a stallion: the Dewhurst, the Guineas, and the Derby. And he won 2 of those. But in hindsight, it was a bad Dewhurst. And the first 4 home in the Guineas, Chris Cook wrote a piece about this. It's the first time since 19 Dickety-Doo that none of them have won a Group 1 since. The Group 1 winners came from Auguste Rodin, who fell at the back of the telly that day. It's not the strongest of Guineas.
Yeah, and look, I mean, you know, I always say, you know, you try win a Guineas. I'd love to win a Guineas, and I wouldn't care if everyone said it was the worst Guineas ever. So, you know, let's never knock a classic winner. Like, it's a very, very hard thing to do. You know, it's very hard just to get a horse to win a, you know, a listed or a group race. You know, to have horses up at that level. You know, they're hen's teeth. So, but just, and I think sometimes that gets lost a bit in the coverage of the sport. You know, yeah,
even on the conversation we're having about classic winners not beating the older generation, the horse that we're all excited about is City of Troy. We can't wait to see what that horse is going to do next season. And is he really going to live up to the hype? I think he will, but let's see. But if they do what they're planning on doing, at least what they're talking about, he won't face an older horse next year. It'll be the 2000 Guineas, the Derby, the Irish Derby, the St. Leger. So then maybe Breeders' Cup Classic, and if Auguste Rodin is still knocking around, then probably not. So we could be really excited about this potentially incredible horse who might actually not race against older horses next season.
Yeah, I mean, if you put all of that off,
yeah, who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
You've won the Triple Crown for the first time in 54 years. No one's really going to hold that against them.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone's going to hold it. You know, that's just, you know, for a horse to just perform that consistently is, you know, it has to be seriously good, because it's going to have an off day in there somewhere. and still have to win in spite of it, which I suppose is what makes a champion.
Claire, you were talking about soundness, and both of you would be known for producing horses who've got real consistency, but also soundness. What is the key to that in your training at home?
A lot of factors. I think ourselves, just our kind of scientific background. So the veterinary knowledge, I thoroughly understand, and I want to understand why horses do what they do and how we can always improve things in our training to make it better for them. We're very lucky in Lambourn. We've got the use of 7 different gallops, so we can vary how we use them to suit the horse and its training. It's the same as humans, we're all different. What surface we're better training on. Once a week, we trot up every single horse with the vets. Our riders, they've all really experienced and can provide that feedback on anything, if it doesn't quite feel right, or even if it's just in their mouth, they might be like, oh, they're just kind of grabbing hold of the bit on one side. Could you just get the dentist to have a look next week? It's a constant feedback system, and we encourage our team to really get involved because they make this work. Yes, we are a big factor, but they're just as big. Without them, we couldn't do it. Our physio, she's incredible, but she's got magic hands. I wish you'd treat us, the team.
I was going to say, I could do with some help with my back, let me tell you.
Yeah, me too. So yeah, it's a huge team effort, and it's always about being proactive rather than reactive as to how our approach is, really.
It's spotting a very small problem before it becomes a big problem. I think that's a lot of things with soundness, and being prepared to say, okay, well, we're just going to have to skip a work here and go easy for 4 or 5 days and then kick on and go again. And actually you get rewarded in the long term. And horses that are feeling good and moving well run well, and
yeah,
fairly, it sounds simple.
Yeah, and as Dan said before, if a horse needs backwards and needs time, we send them away. We send them, go out in a field. There's no point an owner spending a fortune of a horse in training for no reason. We'd much rather they go and home and develop. And we've had a filly, Kiara Pearl, with Andrew, and she's just been out in the field most of the time. But she's come back and she's been really unlucky not to win 3 novices. She won 1, got the bonus, and yeah, I think she was beaten
in 2 photos on the other 2.
Yeah, so that, yeah, a lot of bonuses to have won. But it's only because Andrew, supported giving her time, and yeah, you get rewarded later on.
When I was getting into the sport initially, it was very secretive what trainers were doing. Like you could there were certain trainers like John Gosden was very, very open about what they were doing. Paul Nichols kind of copped on very early that the media is not the enemy. The media is the friend. They can get the message out there to the racing fans, and racing fans become race owners, and so on and so forth. But it was very secretive. They didn't want to tell you where a horse was going. They certainly didn't want to tell you how ready a horse was for a day. And that's different now. And both of you are a great example of that. You're very open with what you do. You're very forward thinking and very engaging. But how do you then bring the owner into more of that information? How do you share that info with the owner to make them feel like they are a part of the everyday process?
It's about talking to them, or messaging backwards and forwards. And WhatsApp is great. Sometimes it's the bane of my life because you go out and watch a lot on the gallops and you look down your phone and there's 17 new messages. But you're sharing the videos, you're sharing the photos, the kind of interaction. And some of the owners, they love to get involved with the race planning. Others have got no interest. They just want to know when the horse is going to run. And everyone's got to do. People own racehorses for so many different reasons, and it's about understanding what they want to achieve with it. What do they want to get out of it? Do they want a horse that can, run at sort of their local tracks and they can go and watch it? So we're going to target those, races at those tracks with them and pick them out. Or, do they just want, are they a breeder who it's really important that that horse gets its win, and it doesn't matter where it is. If it's in Timbuktu, that's fine. It's a win on the board and we'll build from there. And, do they want to be a bit clever with how they place it? Do they want to run up a sequence of handicaps? Do they want to target this plot? There's so many different ways that people do things, and so many different reasons why people own horses. I mean, often it's something that brings like a family together. It's something that they do and they'll all go and watch the horse together. And we've got loads of examples of that. So, racehorse ownership it's expensive and it's something you can buy, but in a syndicate it isn't that expensive. But it's that kind of that moment as your horse is turning in, and is it going to do it today? And that kind of that feeling is, that's the buzz that we all get out of it, and I think that's the buzz most owners get out of it, is that sort of moment of as your horse kind of hits the front, and is it going to get in there? That's the sort of the thrill of it, really, and to experience that is, it still gives you a buzz. Been involved in the sport for over 20 years, and it's still every time that horse that you have, whether it just gives you that kick, I suppose.
One thing we've learned, I think it was quite a while ago now, we did personality tests with the whole team, and even the quiet ones all came back super, super competitive. And I would say it's probably true of most racehorse owners as well. There is an underlying current of competitiveness. And as you said, you can go to a sale ring, and yes, great if you've got £1 million to spend. But if you haven't, and you've only got 10 grand or 5 grand, it's how do you solve all those pieces of the puzzle to find that horse that's going to be the Astro King that gives you a Cambridgeshire win, or the Don't Tell Claire that's going to come second at Royal Ascot. Those kind of highs that you can't buy anywhere else. And our way of training is to help give all those little pieces of the puzzle with the owner together, kind of help solve it. And you're never going to get the answer on day one. Like, that's the whole fun of it. It isn't black and white. You can have lots of bits of data and horsemanship and feedback from riders and our own experience, but it doesn't mean you're going to get it right on day one. And that's part of the fun, is then as the journey goes on, how do you improve that horse? How do you get it better? And it's very rewarding, and we're really lucky to do what we do, and hopefully give owners lots of fun.
The vast majority of people won't own a racehorse, and vast majority of us will certainly not own a horse that's good enough to win at Royal Ascot, but we can back them. And the bond that you get between someone you've never met before, the people who listen to this show, who are united in their love of a certain racehorse, or will say something. I have a theory about Brave Man's Game not being quite the same horse this season. I could be way off base. And if I am, then I'll eat my humble pie. It won't be the first time, and it certainly won't be the last. But if I'm right about that, then we'll see. But there'll be plenty of people who will be saying, you were wrong. You were wrong. And there'll be plenty of people who will then also be saying, oh, you were right. But the experience of being on track, whether you're in the stands cheering on a horse, and there's somebody you've never met before, but that person is cheering on the same horse, and then you find yourself hugging if that one wins. Those little moments, there's very few things in life that can bring people together like that. Football can, and racing can. And I think the bond between us and the equine talent, there's something incredibly special about it. And if you could bottle that and sell it, you would be a billionaire several times over. It's how we fully embrace that, market it, and get it across to the people who, for whatever reason, think that the sport is cruel in a completely wrong way, just to let them understand these horses are well cared for, they're well looked after, they wouldn't exist without the sport of racing. But also, especially after COVID, we need things that bring us together. And my God, racing is a sport that can definitely do that.
Yeah, and what's I think so magic about it, something so humbling about the horse right in the middle of it, because they don't really ask anything of you, and they're such incredible animals, and they're just athletes, but that sort of those little moments with them are very special. And I think if people can connect with a horse in any way, they really should take the opportunity. And thoroughbreds they're so highly attuned and so sensitive to everything around them, and that sort of bond is and I think this weekend probably Cody's Wish is like the ultimate kind of you want to tell that story and kind of the tragedy. I mean, there's a huge tragedy around the whole thing, but that sort of magic connection, like that's sort of, there's something very special around horses being able to do that and bring people together, like you say, in whatever that bond, because it's not verbal. I guess it's a feeling.
Yeah. But if that was scripted, if that was a film, you'd turn it off. That's ridiculous. That couldn't possibly. What, this kid who was desperately ill is introduced to a horse at Godolphin. Make-A-Wish Foundation send him there. Of all the horses, this one horse strolls up to him and puts his head in his lap as a foal. And that horse goes on to become a multiple Group 1 winner on the dirt, including winning back-to-back Breeders' Cup Dirt Miles. Nobody would believe that story. That's complete Hollywood fantasy. It's nonsense. And yet it's real. We all saw it happen. It's incredible.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't know if... I sort of rarely get emotional about things, but yesterday evening when I was kind of reading through all that, I just kind of saw that on Twitter, and I was just like, well, you know, it was a moment.
I think you'd have to have a heart of stone not to. I felt like it was a punch in the gut. I never met Cody. I hadn't been over there, but you couldn't. Everyone knew what the story was. Everyone knew how much that horse meant to him, what he meant to them. I think Godolphin deserve an enormous amount of credit for what they did. They didn't have to do all they did for him, and they didn't have to do all they did for his family. They were incredible levels of kindness. And what a terrible end, but what an incredible story.
Yeah. So, you know, I'd say life was pretty tough for Cody, but, you know, he had something very special there. So.
Yeah, he was given some great moments and light relief during what must have been a painful existence, but incredible. But even the bond between horses and like, I know people who worked in the City of London and couldn't cope with it. It was not good for them, and they now work with racehorses every day. And some of their friends can't understand why they would leave lucrative jobs in London to go live in the countryside. And it saved their lives. Like, being out there working with those horses day in, day out literally did save them.
Yeah, I mean, we're very lucky to make a living, you know, working with these animals, and you know, it's not for, you know, money or anything really. It's really that being able to work with them, and, you know.
I do quite like the short commute.
Yeah.
Back in the day in forensics.
Definitely benefits to working from home, Claire. Definitely benefits.
Exactly. And if we do have to go racing, at least it's not during peak work hours. Generally. True. Yeah. Although it's easy to forget just how big the UK is and how difficult it can be to get from one race course to another, to get from your yards to a different race course. There's a lot of traveling involved, but the day-to-day inner workings of it. As we come towards the end, what is the ambition for Daniel and Claire moving forward? What would you most like to achieve next season?
I think, you know, bigger and better again, you know, win some more better races, more prize money, more races, you know. That's really... just keep giving our owners a great time on the track. Like the rewards that we've had this year with our owners, like seeing how happy they've been, you just want to keep doing that. I get a kick out of that. So yeah, keep doing that more and more. Seeing the team develop and you know, like, you know, go forward in you know what they're doing and their skills improving, and like, you know, that's very rewarding as well. Yeah, we're in this together, and you know, you want everyone to enjoy their job. And yes, we're lucky to work with horses, but heck, when it's pouring with rain in the middle of winter, it's pretty hard work. Stacking shelves in Asda looks attractive all of a sudden. Yeah, so you know, it is seeking opportunities, and our industry, back when we joined, there was very little development opportunities, and that's been a big thing for us, is to try and push that forward so that people can upskill, they can become better work riders, or they can become much better at treating injuries in the yard, or learning physiotherapy skills, or like, there's so much you can learn in racing and progress into, and I just want those doors opening more and more for people. We're very lucky to be involved, aren't we, in certain different ways. But like the rider coaching development program is exceptional. And I think that just, the more traction that gets, the better our work riders will become, the more confident they'll be, the more they'll enjoy it. And we'll be better for the horses. So there's lots to look forward to.
If I led a revolution, there was a coup d'etat, and I make you king and queen of British racing, what is the one thing you would both implement to make the sport better? You can't say that all racehorses must be trained by Daniel and Claire Kübler.
Just the very
I wouldn't want that anyway. It'd be a bit boring.
Just City of Troy.
Yeah, exactly. Move him across. Come on, the lads. Aidan doesn't need all the good ones.
Yeah, he's all right. He's got Henry Longfellow. He's grand.
Oh, I mean, an obvious one is always going to be prize money, but
I think sort of on a, I suppose something that we could do better is I think we could package up. There's two things really. I think one, racing 24/7, 365. We need to look at that, because actually that's what creates a lot of the pressure and tension on the participants. So that's something I'd look at. And I'm not sure the premierization program addresses that at all. I think if anything, it's pushing it in the other direction.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think that sort of, look, we're very privileged to work in professional sport, but there has to be an acceptance that it's relentless on people at times. And, so and I think that there needs to be more thought in that particular area. I think how we present the sport, and that's not necessarily to do with the timing slots and all the rest of it, but actually I think we could present the sport better. Just because we've got 2 channels showing every single race doesn't actually mean that we have to present it like that. There's too much focus on the really, really big races. And as a flat trainer, I can talk about just looking at I look at jumping from the outside. There's too much focus on the Cheltenham Festival. Actually, hero some of that stuff up and around it and all of those sort of things, and tell the narrative of all the steps along the way. And I think, those are 2 areas I think we could look at.
They're very good answers. I think there's probably an over-reliance on Cheltenham because the fan base is so engaged by it. And because the fan base is so engaged, then the media decides to give them more of what they want. And then it just becomes this perpetuating thing that it's, oh, well, let's build to Cheltenham. Where in actual fact, there's some incredible racing leading up to it that we could all build up to. And NBC do a great job of telling the story of a horse before the Breeders' Cup races, those little inserts, but they do the same thing during the Triple Crown coverage. And we could do an awful lot more of that.
Yeah, and I think there's just because there's lots of different people doing it, actually sometimes slightly more overarching. I mean, British racing probably needs better prize money, but it also needs a bigger marketing budget to pull people in. I actually think we've got a great sport. We're just not getting the traction that we could get if, like British market. I guess British horse racing probably has a marketing budget that's not even close to one Premiership football team, for example. So how can we get the eyeballs if we're not, you have to invest in that side of the equation to make it work. And I think there's arguments about prize money and media rights and all the rest of it. And I think that's where all of these, the race courses have to work collectively with the bookmakers to promote the sport, I think. And maybe that's a way of being less confrontational about how much we demand of the bookmaking industry to fund the sport.
I would agree with that as well. Very much so. Finally, horses for the final Furlong Podcast Army to follow going forward. Obviously, Astro King in Bahrain, and I really hope he does it for you. That would be an incredible story. Not least the massive amount of prize money, but just to be winning there would be incredible. Is there a horse over the all-weather during the winter that we should be following? Maybe a couple.
We had a 2-year-old make a nice start to his career the other day called Bravo Zulu. He was 3rd at Wolverhampton, very, very green. He probably does want a mile, so we're going to run him over 7 furlongs next time, because that's what you do. But there's a great series of novices and maidens that were worth 30 grand this year. We've won one of them, and we're going to have a crack with him in a 7 furlong race. And if that works out, brilliant. And if it doesn't, we'll probably have to step him up to mile. So he's one to follow, and he'll be a nice horse next year. I don't know if we'd give him loads of runs on the all-weather. We want to keep him for next year, really, but he's a nice horse.
Yeah, probably Helm Rock as well. I think we might have a a go with him at the all-weather championships. So he's flown this year on the all-weather. So it'd be nice to roll the dice and see how he gets on.
I've thoroughly enjoyed speaking to both of you. You're lovely people, incredibly intelligent, incredibly engaging, and it's very easy to root for you both. If one of you beats me, a horse I've backed in a photo finish, it's okay. I will take that beating because at least it's Daniel and Claire who are the ones who've come out on top. All the very best for the rest of the all-weather season, and please God, we'll get to talk to you before the new flat season in 2024.
Brilliant. Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us on there.
Yeah, really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Daniel and Claire Kübler, if you enjoyed this, like and subscribe on YouTube, on your social media, and on the various different podcast apps as well. We're back with more content on the Final Furlong podcast very, very soon. From all of us, be safe, be well. God bless.